G'day, good evening and welcome to the program. Well, what another week, and the language is starting now to creep in, isn't it? You turn on the TV news right across all the networks, you're picking up the papers, you turn on the radio stations, you hear the words that are meant to create some sort of comfort for us. But don't be conned. The Great Reset. The Great Reset. It sounds like everything that was bad is going to go and everything that's in front of us is going to be good. It's been sanctioned by the royal family. I mean, Prince Charles has said, let's have a great reset. It's been promoted by the world, the left worldwide. I mean, this big great reset is actually going to be a bigger virus than COVID. It's going to have more of an impact on your lifestyle than you could imagine. It's been publicised by the social media elite. And you've got lines like Build Back Better. I think Jacinda Ardern used that as her line when she received the government in New Zealand. And Joe Biden's talking about Build Back Better. And then we've got this sort of post-COVID world, the new normal, all this mantra. Don't let it con you. What does it actually mean, and do we actually get a say? Well, the bottom line is we won't. This is a deal that is being done by the elites and is being foisted upon the weak governments of the world. And frankly, at the moment, it looks like the Australian government falls into that category as well. But maybe you can have a hand on trying to change it. At the same time, this week, we've heard that China, now a member of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, has taken time to have a close look at the human rights violations of, yes, America. They've decided amongst about 10 things that they want to see an end to the political polarisation in the United States. Now, that's all very well and good for the Chinese Communist Party, a one-party state, because there can't be any other party. But you do know that in America, there's two great forces at work. There's the Democrats, their colours tends to be blue, and the Republicans, and they tend to be red. And Donald Trump is red, and Biden is the blue side. But you know that if he is elected President of the United States, what we've heard from places like China in this UN Declaration on Human Rights and this review of America's human rights is the sort of marching orders that Joe Biden will, of course, if we ever see him out of the White House bunker, will, of course, be attending to. I mean, the guy, we haven't seen him for very much in the last 6 months. He's about to become the most powerful man in the world if all the rhetoric and all of the social media tweets are to be believed. The Chinese have also said they don't want the United States to interfere in any other country's internal issues. And what they mean by that is Hong Kong and, of course, Taiwan, despite the fact that Taiwan is a democracy, the free China, the people of the People's Republic of China see Taiwan as a renegade province. So, of course, if the United States says anything about Taiwan, it's a fundamental breach of the human rights of the Chinese people. This is just absolute rubbish. So, over the last week, as we've gone through Remembrance Day, I stopped and I thought, like any other decent person would, at 11 o'clock on the 11th, last Wednesday, and I realised that we should be concerned, lest we forget that our freedoms that we enjoy are in fact being secured by those prepared to defend it. And the 5 oldest continuous democracies in the world, the USA, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, have always defended freedom, who've always been amongst the first to answer the call when there's tyranny in other places. But now we have so many people within each of these countries, including our own, that seem to be out to weaken our efforts, pull down our traditions, change the way we think. And the world is in fact right now doing, and in a lot of ways it is history repeating, what we saw in pre-World War II Europe. If you think about 2022, China, if this is passing, putting a big dark shadow over the rest of the world, China may be a country that in fact many are saying we should boycott when it comes to the 2022 Winter Olympics that are occurring there. But of course, plenty of people in the sporting world would say, no, keep politics out of sport. But let's face it, sport is full of politics. There's political operatives who are active in sport. There are sporting operatives that are active in politics. There's political decisions that are taken in sport every day. There are political choices. There are political sponsors in sport. Local sports organisations, state organisations, the national organisations are all highly political. And so the Australian Olympic Committee, of course, is the Olympic-sized version of this highly political environment. And naturally enough, because they live in a rarefied atmosphere of self-importance, the last thing they want to see is us boycotting on principle, there's that word again, principle, the People's Republic of China and the Winter Olympics and the entire PR spin that will come for the PRC. So if only sport was just about sport. It seems, if you look at the last week, we're seeing more and more reasons to know the elites, be they the big tech, be they the big media, be they the big royals, or be they the big Chinese and Marxist leftist elites around the world, are all choosing to reset your lifestyle. The last thing they're going to do is touch theirs. Keen to know what you think. Hashtag Hardgrave at skynews.com.au. You can also email me directly at gary.hardgrave@skynews.com.au. Stellar panel. We always try and do that on a Friday night as we fight for freedom here. Malcolm Roberts is the Senator for Queensland for One Nation. He joins me here in the Brisbane Citadel, in the Sydney News Centre, the great and the powerful and very, very wise Bronwyn Bishop, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, and from Advance Australia, Liz Storer, who's never afraid to hold back on anything when it comes to fighting for freedom. Great to have you all with us tonight. The big reset, should we be worried, Liz? How do you feel about this great reset nonsense?
Well, nonsense sums it up, Gary. Sums it up perfectly. What frightens me most about this, and firstly, I should mention I'm no longer with Advance Australia. I am lead advisor with GT Communications, and very glad to be
Fantastic.
so.
Thank you.
Thank you. What frightens me most about this reset is that younger generations are completely unaware of what's happening. We've seen the left for decades now infiltrate our schools, infiltrate our unis, and these kids, now young adults actually, a lot of them, wouldn't know Marx if he slapped them in the face, have never picked up the Communist Manifesto, and yet we've got Kamala Harris, who, can I say, is not Vice President-elect. I am just as much Vice President-elect as Kamala is this evening. We've got Kamala.
Congratulations on your victory. That's
Thank
fantastic.
you. Oh, thank you. Yes, it's been wonderful. We've got Kamala tweeting, you can't make this stuff up, talking about a reset, tweeting just before the election a small video that she did the voiceover of, literally espousing the virtues of socialism. You can't make this stuff up. She didn't say socialism, but the little video was literally talking about the fact that there is no equality in the world unless equality of outcome is what we're all experiencing here, not equality of opportunity. And so we've created this culture now, as the left so artfully does, where it's understood to be compassionate, etc., and so on, being synonymous with this. Literally, communism is what her video was espousing. And this is the woman, make no mistake about it, unless the Trumpians are successful, this is the woman who will be President of the United States. Joe Biden will just fill the seat for a little time and toddle on off.
Yeah, I suspect he'll be in the White House basement the whole time. We'll just get him wheeled out, a bit like sort of Weekend at Bernie's. He'll just get wheeled out every so often for a photo opportunity, if in fact he actually even gets installed. Sorry, aren't I lacking in grace? Bronwyn Bishop, you can deal with me accordingly, but seriously, we're being conned. I mean, if you look at Solzhenitsyn, the whole Gulag archipelago, that enormous idea of the last man clapping, no one wanted to be the last man clapping in this sort of scenario of that Gulag archipelago. You know that there's a lot of lessons not being taught to young people. They're making mistakes. Simple.
Well, Gary, of course, the trouble began when the rich and the powerful elites of the Western world, privileged elites of the West, supported Lenin and Stalin. And I'm talking about the likes of George Bernard Shaw, of Sydney and Beatrice Webb, of John Maynard Keynes, and of Lady Astor. These people supported these things going on and absolutely refused to see what the truth was. Solzhenitsyn came along and really exposed it all and showed the cruelty and the brutality of what the communist regime was. Now, that stemmed the tide and the march of socialism for right up to the time that the Berlin Wall came down. But then George Bush weakened. And instead of saying we have to keep fighting to show that people know what socialism is so we don't repeat those mistakes, he went all weak and he said, oh, there's going to be a peace dividend. And we stopped teaching people what socialism was and what we had to stand up for, with the principles we believed in, to have a free people who had rights and liberties. Well, we then get the neo-Fabians. And they're the neo-Fabians who go to Davos and the World Economic Forum. They're the ones preaching the Great Reset. And this is the way to socialism. But in the interim, we got Donald Trump. And he was prepared to fight back, and fight he did, which in the eyes of the neo-Fabians made it necessary for them to destroy him. And that's the pattern that we have followed to this very point we're now at. And we can only hope, and I do not give up on Donald Trump being successful at this point in time. I think it was a mistake for our Prime Minister to be congratulating Mr. Biden because Mr. Biden said himself that he would not even attempt to claim victory until it was properly certified. Well, there are a lot of legal ways to go yet, and it has not been properly certified. So we have to hold firm. Donald Trump has led the way. He has changed. There are, 73 million people in America who are prepared to fight back, and they need the voice and the support of those of us who believe in freedom of the individual and freedom of opportunity and equality of opportunity, not outcome, as Liz said.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Malcolm Roberts, this is the point. This Great Reset, it's a, three-word slogan, always pretty popular. But this is not a great thing. This is damaging people's freedoms, people's lifestyles. This is something that is worth fighting for. And when you hear it and the people saying it, you should condemn them. That's how I read it.
I agree with you entirely. That's once you get past the fact that this Great Reset is claimed to be fixing the world's climate. It'll fix poverty. It'll fix inequality. It'll fix control. It'll fix everything, Gary. Why shouldn't we wait for it?
Yeah.
Because it is just another slogan to hide the reality that this is socialism on the march. And socialism is always about control. We've had this so many times. And, in the past, people have controlled others using physical force. Now, if you grab me around the throat or put a rifle butt in my head, Gary, people can see what you're doing. The insidiousness of socialism this way and slogans is that they sound so nice and people don't really see what's going on. And next thing with the gradualism, you're enslaved. And so the essential debate, the essential theme that runs through all of the articles that you've introduced tonight in your email and tonight in your editorial is control versus freedom. Yeah. And that control versus freedom is a battle we all have within us, but we all thrive when we actually are free ourselves and free from our own shackles, but also the planet thrives and nations thrive when they're free. Society has proven that time and time and time again.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the battle that's on in China, there is a battle in China, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The Chinese Communist Party authorities in Beijing don't have as much control of China. It's the money that's actually changing things. The richest man in China, though, has been sat down on his backside. He has tried to do a float of this massive Alibaba organisation, and they've taken him down. They've said, no, you can't do that anymore. So suddenly the idea of free capital floating around and creating opportunity for everyday Chinese to actually be part of a growing world economy has been controlled by the Politburo in Beijing. This is nasty. And so, Bronwyn, you see, this is a foretaste of what could come. And if Joe Biden, Hayden Biden, as many are calling him, and others are calling him Beijing Joe, I mean, I'm not trying to be pejorative here, although maybe people say I am. But if this bloke is actually going to become the President of the United States, he cannot be encumbered to a group of people who actually hate the kind of society that we are used to having.
Well, that's the point, Gary. You see, if Trump is not re-elected, then the two most powerful men in the world are Putin and President Xi. Now, it is quite clear that President Xi wants to rule the world. He wants to be the dominant power. And as long as Trump was there, he knew if he moved on Taiwan, that Trump would act. But he knows that if Trump is gone, Biden will do nothing. So you can watch what's going to happen to Taiwan. Watch what will happen in the Middle East, where Trump had actually managed to have countries of the Middle East come to an agreement with Israel. And yet you'll have the Biden and those people behind him who'll probably go back to the Obama policy of getting into bed with Iran. So the problems that we're going to face and what is at risk from this election, and I deliberately call these people the neo-Fabians because the Fabian Society was founded by the Webbs and George Bernard Shaw to implement the change to socialism gradually. Their symbol and the stained glass window that was commissioned is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that is why I think we have to identify these people for what they are. They preach nice-sounding things, but there's a wolf in there who will eat the sheep very, very easily. And we have to stop being sheep. We have to stop putting, not only putting the hook in our own mouth, we're now about to swallow that hook. And we've just got to learn that that's the end of us if we do. So it is a very troubling time. And Mr. Ma came out in that speech, which President Xi objected to so strongly, made the point that there is no such thing as a system in the financial system in China. They make it up as they go along. And that's why we can never believe any of the data that comes out of China. But we can believe they are building a force where they wish to conquer large parts of the world and be the dominant power, controlling the lives. And us in Australia, we would be the vassal state, with bowing the knee and bowing our back to our Chinese masters as they took our food and our iron ore. That is not what that is not what my father fought for. It's not what I believe I served in the parliament for, and you served in the parliament for, to leave to our children and grandchildren. We've got to fight hard.
No way, no. No way, no. And I mean, Liz, you've only got to look at the way that China has been saying to Australia. We are grossly interfering in China because we've raised questions about the democracy in Taiwan. We want Taiwan to be protected. We used to recognise until 1973 Taiwan as the China. Following Richard Nixon's lead, we then changed our allegiance to the Beijing authorities. Boy, that's rewarding. And then equally in Hong Kong, you've got to look at what's happened in Hong Kong, where you've got legislators who have actually resigned from the parliament there. So democracy's dead in Hong Kong. They want to tackle Taiwan. They've told Australia to, I'll tidy it up, shut the heck up. You know that that in itself should be a warning to each of us that value the opportunity to speak our mind and listen to other views. That debate is not allowed, it's not alive in China.
Absolutely. This is a communist party. That seems to be a very simple fact that so many people just don't seem to understand. Perhaps in the 21st century, they think even the Communist Party looks a bit different. It does not. This is the same regime that has countless millions of innocents' blood on their hands. Let's be abundantly clear on that. When I was watching the American election, as I'm still watching it because it's still happening, Gary, as I was watching the American election, I kept saying to myself, if Americans knew nothing more than the fact of China's plans for the Pacific and just how intrinsically linked both Kamala and Joe, it's not just Joe, are in the pockets of the CCP, they wouldn't vote Democrat, not in a million years, not in a million years, but people don't understand what will take place. They don't understand the strength of that alliance. And it's utterly frightening to think that that may yet become something that the rest of us will have to look on and witness as it unfolds. China is not going to change. It is a communist regime. It is hell-bent on world supremacy, no matter what? And I think anyone who listens to that and says that's fear-mongering, I would urge them pick up a history book, for heaven's sake, or even just Google comments that the president is on record saying that we will bend these democracies to our will. We think that China will become more like us as the world advances and, you know, democracies around the world now outnumber communist dictatorships. They have no such plan, let me tell you.
Well, they don't. And I mean, Malcolm Roberts, people think you're wearing, you know, we're wearing a tinfoil hat, raising this sort of stuff. They think we're, you know, mad conspiracy theorists. We're not. I'm simply, and I don't mind being proved wrong. Not one part of me minds being proved wrong about this. But the questions have got to be asked. And, you know, when I saw that National Cabinet, and fortunately I didn't make this decision, but National Cabinet were considering including China in a travel bubble to Australia, I would have thought that the simple way of making that travel bubble work would have been to include the democracies of our region, the fledgling democracies in the Pacific that are needing Australian tourism back into it, the democracy in Taiwan, the democracy in Japan, the democracy in South Korea, before we started to put some people from a totalitarian regime onto a plane in and out of Australia. I would have thought that was the simple thing. But anyway, state borders are still shut. It's pretty distressing, isn't it? Australia is still split in so many ways.
Yes, Gary, you make a very, very good point, because China is the country that unleashed the COVID virus on the world. Not only that, it made it possible for the COVID virus to get a head start because it denied its existence for so long. And then have a look at the country that has done the best of any on earth, and that's Taiwan. In the same time as we've had, an actually longer period, it's been exposed longer, it's had 7 deaths from COVID. Yep. We've had over 900. We have destroyed our economy doing that. Taiwan has simply isolated the sick, isolated the vulnerable, and let everyone else get back to stay at work. Yep. And their economy has barely entered into negative. I think it's about 0.5% negative growth. That's phenomenal. Yeah. And our Prime Minister said we should be attacking China. Now the National Cabinet is saying, let the mainland Chinese in and ignore Taiwan. This is insane. Yeah. But let me just go back to a point you mentioned a little while ago. I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I connected with a bloke called Ron Kitching. He's dead now, many years ago. And he lauded the works of Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises in the Austrian School of Economics. And he told me a story, and this is first-hand, or well, second-hand actually, because he met up with a professor from Princeton, and this professor had Chinese heritage, and he was Chinese, even though he was an American citizen. And I think it was in the 80s, and I can't remember the name of the Chinese president at the time, Xi Jinping maybe. But anyway, the Princeton professor was visiting his original roots in China, and the president of China got wind of this. So he said, could I have a couple of hours of your time? And the Princeton professor said, sure. So he started off this conversation, and remember, Ron met this Princeton professor and had a good long conversation. And the Princeton professor said that the Chinese president's opening comments were, look at the wealth of our country, but look at the state of it. It's destitute, it's poor. And he said, can you tell me how we can fix it? And the Princeton professor told him, and then he said, can you give me a couple more hours? And to cut a long story short, he gave him days. Yeah. He kept asking him to come back, and that opened up China. But the fundamental thing with China is they still want to control people. Yeah, they've opened up the economy, but they'll never be strong, because always beneath control, Gary, there is fear. These people are terrified of losing control. And so what we need to do is focus on our strengths. Don't worry too much about China. Focus on our strengths and lift to them, because we are destroying our own country internally right now.
Our strengths have got to be built around our values, our principles as a nation. The things that we, over the 120 years that Australia has been a nation, have earned us the right to say we are the 6th oldest continuous democracy in the world. And it's only the UK and the USA and Canada that have stood with Australia and New Zealand, the 7th oldest continuous democracy, to defend those freedoms. Switzerland and Sweden are number 4 and 5, just for the record, but my understanding is they actually haven't necessarily fired any angry shots at any stage of the last 100 years. Got to take a break. I want to come back and talk about how the country split up and also the impact on the ADF. I'm shocked by what's occurring. We'll talk about that more in just a moment.
John Howard's got some big ideas.
The main thing in public life is to get the big things right.
This Saturday, his special one-on-one chat with John Anderson.
You don't need to pursue the identity if you have the right policy.
The inspiring
Things that unite us are greater than the things that divide us.
and visionary John Howard.
I felt I had an opportunity to do some good things and improve the country.
In conversation with John Anderson, Saturday, 8:30 p.m.
So, I need a holiday.
Do you?
Yeah, for Australia.
What about the outback?
Yes.
We could catch our own lunch.
I know exactly what you mean.
We should just go somewhere we've always wanted to go.
Yes. Oh, honey, I could teach the kids to surf.
You don't know how to surf.
Yeah, I mean, obviously someone would teach me and then I would pass on the wisdom.
Plan a holiday here this year for Australia.
Say you want to learn to write a book, write a movie, write a law. Cut. Oh, you want to learn to write things, negotiate the right paycheck, make dinner just the right way, do the right thing. Fine, you're more of an overachiever. You rather own the room, own a presentation, own a business, start a business, be a business. We know some things. Well, these people know things that things you even know was a thing. They know them, and they're all right here, waiting for you to see today's the day.
Manufacturing has never been more important to Australia than right now. That's why Visy has just invested almost $1 billion to acquire the largest glass bottle maker in Australasia, bringing our total green-collar workforce to 7,200. Visy, manufacturing Australian jobs.
This is Hardgrave.
Thanks so much for your company. We're in conversation with Bronwyn Bishop, Liz Storer and Senator Malcolm Roberts. National Cabinet met again today briefly, a whole bunch of announcements. Everybody's going to open up except for Western Australia. Perth remains the most isolated city geographically and it seems politically in the world. Liz Storer, I also note, and I said a couple of weeks ago, and people thought, oh, Gary, you're gilding the lily here, that the Queensland border won't open up until the Suncorp State of Origin match was dealt with. Everybody from New South Wales except Sydney-siders can come, and today they announced this afternoon, the Queensland government said 52,500 people can come to Suncorp. There's no dress code, but, oh, by the way, Liz, there's no dancing allowed in Queensland still. We can have 52,500 at the grandstand, but only 200 at a funeral or something. So go figure. It's all crazy, isn't it?
These rules are doing my head in, Gary, especially when cases are so low now. I mean, we've even got Victoria, 0 days, every single day now. We're well past the point, you'd think, of these ridiculous restrictions. And when you're talking about a state that has now hosted a game of tens of thousands of people still throwing out these random restrictions. I mean, a McGowan in WA, you know, leaving state cabinet today, like, yeah, don't worry, team, I've kept you safe. It is utterly ridiculous. This has gone past absurdity. This is ridiculous. And when we're watching countries like the UK still, you know, Devastating what they're seeing unfold there. Here in Australia, we're still acting like we've got some sort of pandemic on our hands. The truth of the matter is we really don't. And yet nobody seems to be calling out the fact we've got states with 0 cases closing their borders to states with 0 cases. And people like McGowan are really just playing politics with this now. He saw it go well for Anastasia Palaszczuk. He's got his election coming up in March, and I think he's doing exactly the same now, going, OK, this pandemic protectionism goes well at the polling booth. I'll take another crack.
Yeah, he wants to keep it going as long as possible. In Victoria, it's basically declared that an experiment on the way the bureaucracy operates, Bromman, produced a mission failure. The public servants are starting to be filtered out the door, sacrificial lambs. But it still strikes me in the deck of cards, about 10 or a dozen people that really did muff up this hotel quarantine fiasco. There is a whole bunch of people who've got to go, including the Joker himself, Daniel Andrews. But people still like him. They still thought, we like being punished. It's sort of, bondage and discipline Victorian style down there, I think.
I said right from the beginning that China not only exported the disease, it also exported fear. And it is that fear factor that has allowed these premiers to control their populations. And it's, people, perfectly normal people who you might think would think properly are cowed into fearing it and saying, well, we need to be locked down, we need to be kept cocooned and so on. So it's a real problem. But the rest of the problem, of course, is how do we restore a functioning federation? That High Court judgment in Western Australia was absolutely of no use at all. We don't know what they've said. All they've said is that they referred the facts of the case to the federal court to determine what facts the High Court would make their determination upon. They've said, no, it was OK to put them in place. Well, was that at the time that the action was begun? We haven't seen a judgment. We haven't seen the reasons for the judgment. So there's a failure in the judiciary to uphold the section that was put deliberately into the Constitution to stop this sort of behaviour by premiers. And then we look at what Premier Chairman Dan is doing down there in Victoria and talking about setting up a centre for communicable
infectious diseases.
Just like the one in Wuhan. Now, is this part of the Belt and Road Initiative? Are they going to bring some of those viruses here and develop them here with the next outbreak? And believe me, if you think we've seen the last outbreak of pandemics, you can think again. Will the next one happen here because the virus has been brought here? I mean, there are serious questions that have to be asked. And it doesn't seem, there is no action on it. It's not happening. We've got statements coming out that, we've met today and in the federal cabinet, whatever that's supposed to mean, elevate the premiers and talk what? Rubbish? Everyone will be open by Christmas? Well, all the bookings are all too late except WA. I just find that the problems that are being created by the way in which we've gone about dealing with these matters are huge and waiting for us to have to be dealt with.
Yeah, look, Bromman, and I really want to support Scott Morrison, but I got to tell you, ScoMo, old buddy, old pal, flying down to Victoria to hold hands with Daniel Andrews next week is not exactly what I would call the photo opportunity of 2020. Just a little bit of rough advice for you there, pal, but you can ignore it at your own peril. Meanwhile, in Victoria, over 700 people have died because of the incompetence of the Andrews government. Their industrial manslaughter laws should kick in. We'll see what happens. But there's been accusations made against the Australian Defence Force. Now, Malcolm Roberts, I am pretty old-fashioned about these things. I support those who are going to put their body on the line in my name, in a uniform of my country, to defend our values in a foreign place. I put my support behind them. Accusations are made. I get it. I understand rumours have been at the heart of some of these things, but there's no heavy inquiry, like Scott Morrison has announced this week, into what's happened in Victoria. 700, 800 people that have died, and yet we're going to go and pick on our finest in uniform. The way we're doing it is, I think, abhorrent. I really don't like it at all.
Gary, this is a very difficult circumstance, very difficult situation, because on the one hand, these people, as we all know, Andrew Hastie has said it really well himself. You can see the pain on Andrew Hastie when he raised this topic 3 years ago. People returning from war have been changed. And we haven't gone in, I haven't gone into battle. I don't know if you have, Gary.
No, never have.
But it is a completely different scenario. There's enormous pressure that we will never, ever come to grips with. We can never understand that. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is these men, in this case it is all men, have gone into battle to uphold our values. And that means they have to be held accountable for their actions. Maybe that means, first of all, making sure that they get very, very good defence. Maybe it also means that they get a very, very fair inquiry. Ben Roberts-Smith himself said he welcomes this.
Yeah.
Even though he's been through the mill himself, he welcomes this because it'll clear the air once and for all. So I think we can take a lead from Ben Roberts-Smith, who's been awarded a VC for his Victoria Cross for his valour, and now he's had the courage to go through this in public, and now he's saying out, let's have the inquiry, let's clear the decks. But I think we also have to, if anyone is found guilty of something that they shouldn't have done, Gary, then they need to be treated with compassion and understanding. And I cannot understand the Minister for Defence saying, we'll strip the medals off them. Well, hang on, they might have done something after 2 years after they've won the medal for some definite valour. We can't do things like that. We've got to be understanding of these people as well as uphold the values that we ask them to fight for.
Yeah, look, Lister, I have not, because of the efforts of so many and generations before me, some of them family members who've stood in my name in other places, I have not had to face that kind of circumstance, and I'm grateful for that. I just simply say I am troubled by the idea of academics, well qualified, bureaucrats, well qualified, and some military are going to inquire into all this sort of thing. I hope they get the values and the principles and the support for these guys right. I just find the whole thing sad and demeaning, and very sad and demeaning.
Indeed. I've actually questioned over the last few days, just to myself, whether this is actually in the national interest, if this is in the public interest to be brought out and have this dirty laundry aired. We know this is not something systemic in our ADF. This is something, there's a small group of individuals, clearly we don't yet know the details, that have committed atrocities. But I'd love to echo what Fitzgibbon said, and he himself is a former Minister of Defence, and he said these guys were deployed for too long and on back-to-back deployments. And as you've said, Gary, you and I and millions of Australian civilians have absolutely no idea what that's like. And we have no idea what that's like thanks to these men and women who go and do it for us so that we can sleep in our beds every night knowing that we're safe. And even I, though, being a civilian as I am, I'm not above wondering. I don't think any of us can be above saying I would never do this or I would never do that after what these people have been through. Mr. Senator Roberts just raised Andrew Hastie, member for Canning, and I remember reading years ago, it would have been, because he was quite new to Parliament at the time, and he won't mind me sharing because this is on the public record, he shared it himself, that even as he was doing his training, these grueling days and days on end that they'd be sent on to have to undergo unspeakable, not only temperatures, but conditions, no sleep for days on end, all the rest of it. And he shared coming back from this particular training trip, just sobbing down the end of the line to his lovely wife, Ruth. The stuff these guys go through breaks them. It absolutely breaks them. And I'm not making excuses for atrocities they may have committed in the line of duty, but we have to keep that in mind, that human beings cannot go through prolonged periods of these high pressure, no sleep, adrenaline running through your veins 24/7, that kind of fear, the environment we can't even imagine for days on end and then still function properly. They just can't.
And
Well,
Gary, if you don't mind me jumping in, I think there's something... I think there's another factor here too that we must...
Brom, I'll let Malcolm just get one line in and I'll come to you.
Yeah, that's something you mentioned in the material you sent out, and that is that there's a catch and release policy for people. You can't hold them, you can't detain them. So some of these people were out to kill our soldiers. They catch them, our soldiers catch them, and then have to let them go again because it's not a proper theatre of war. I know that if I was under that scenario, I'd be thinking twice about letting them go, and there's nowhere to keep them. What else are you going to do? You know, when people's minds are under that much stress, Brom and Gary, you know, we've got to be understanding and compassionate about that.
And Brom, I think, and I don't mean to demean my sincerity at all, but I think about Jack Nicholson's line in A Few Good Men. You know, can we handle the truth? I mean, it's kind of, I guess, if they've done the wrong thing, the system will out. But I am concerned about it.
Gary, I sat in that Parliament in the House of Representatives as we stood again and again mourning the death of a soldier in Afghanistan. And we made great speeches about their sacrifice for us, the way they represented us. We as a people, our governments, both Labor and Liberal, sent those men to fight for our principles in a foreign land. And as I said, we eulogised and spoke of them. I even attended ramp ceremonies when those bodies were returned to Australia. And yet this same government that we sent to fight for us is now attacking our own people, our own soldiers. I worked as hard as I could not to have Australia sign up to the International Criminal Court because I could see how it could be used against us as a matter of international propaganda. But the reality was that Alexander Downer had virtually committed us. But one thing I did get added was a footnote that said we would never hand over any of our soldiers to that court, which is the threat that is held over if we don't investigate, they'll do. But I insisted that that went in. Now let's look what's happened. Mr. Justice Legay Brereton, Major General Legay Brereton, a former commander of the 5th Brigade, the 2nd Division, has spent 4 years investigating these issues. 4 years. That investigation actually advertised in Afghanistan for Afghanis to come forward and testify or give evidence against our soldiers. We paid for people to go there to try and find people who would either tell the truth or tell lies. How do we know?
Unbelievable. 4
years this has gone on. And those men have lived with that for this 4 years. We are now told that there is a report that's going to be released, which we will find shocking. Peter Jennings has very wisely warned that this will be used by ISIS in a recruiting program for them to say they're justified in taking the lives of Australians. And that will be civilian as well as military people. We are hanging these people out to dry and saying that the response is we will have a further investigation. And that investigation will see whether or not there should be any prosecutions in line with the requirements under the ICC. We will never hand over any of our soldiers to that court for them to make the investigation. And if you take a look at who sits on it and would be sitting in judgment on us, I just get anger, which is beyond belief. So can I say that we have a huge obligation to the men and women who serve. 29,000 people have served in Afghanistan. When I was Minister for Defence, Industry, Science and Personnel, we didn't send many people overseas at all. It was into Bosnia then, and they had to go via being seconded into the British Army, and then they could go across and fight. But the long and the short of it is that they have worn our uniform under our flag to support our values. Now, our values are important.
Exactly.
But for the government to turn on our soldiers and to hold them up through this period, we have had something like, we have lost more soldiers in the years we've been in Afghanistan to suicide than we lost in combat. Yeah. So just understand the stresses that they're under, and understand one more point. The rules under which they fight are called terms of engagement. And they literally write down what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And then there is a definition of what is an atrocity or what is a war crime set out in the ICC. And this is what is almost like being told you go there to fight with one arm behind your back. I can only say, as I sat in that parliament and heard the eulogies of these men and the others who equally served with great valour, and attending that ramp ceremony to receive those bodies back, and for us now to be putting the whole of our ADF under some sort of additional pressure, I find very difficult to come to terms with indeed. We owe these men a lot.
Hear, hear.
I congratulate you on what you've just said, and I thank you for your eloquence, but the substance of your argument. And I also make this very plain observation. We did this, the Australian government did this, made these announcements in the week of Remembrance Day.
Correct.
I find it just sickening to my core, and I hold all of my freedoms in the palm of my hand and at the tip of my tongue, purely off the back of those who've served this nation. And I feel very emotional about it as well. Going to take a break. We'll come back. We'll stand up for the workers of Australia. Somebody has to. More in a moment.
I spent my life building this company.
Journey across the world with the man who built Westfield.
When I think back of my childhood as a young Jewish boy fleeing the Nazis, it's hard to imagine how I ended up here. Blood was gushing out of him, and of course he died on the spot. There was no pussycat, there was no pushover.
Meeting him was my miracle.
The inspiring true story, What Will Become of Us, November 29.
So, I need a holiday.
Do you?
Yeah, for Australia.
What about the outback?
Yes, yes.
We could catch our own lunch.
I know exactly what you mean.
We should just go somewhere we've always wanted to go.
Yes. Oh, honey, I could teach the kids to surf.
You don't know how to surf.
Yeah, I mean, obviously someone would teach me and then I would pass on the wisdom.
Plan a holiday here this year for Australia.
Studies show that being overweight can impair your immune system, so there's no better time than now to be healthy. Be strong. Be whatever you want to be. OptiSlim has your back. With delicious shakes, bars and soups, the OptiSlim weight loss range can help you take back control of your body, lose weight, improve your immune system and be your version of better. Order online at optislim.com.au or Chemist Warehouse today.
It's never been more important to make every dollar count. That's why millions of Aussies use Finder to help them save money. Find a better deal for you. Try finder.com.au.
Score even more at our massive Milwaukee Mania event on now, exclusively at Total Tools. Spend $4,999, get up to $1,000 to spend on Milwaukee products. Hurry, must end Saturday. Total Tools, low prices on every tool for every trade, guaranteed.
To prove our AA battery is the world's longest lasting, we tested it against our competitor's best battery. And Energizer Ultimate Lithium wins again. Energizer, backed by science, matched by no one.
It lives at first light, wherever we push ourselves. When we pull together, it lives over the door, at the end of every paintbrush, after the sun has set. It lives in going for a 6, where a 4 would have done it. It lives in every square inch of this place. And because we live here, Can lives here.
Your thoughts attract things with a force that you cannot see, but is definitely real.
I don't understand what's happening here.
I think you and I collided for a reason.
Rent it now on Foxtel Store.
This is Hardgrave.
Thanks so much for your company. Anna Rawlins will be here with Newsnight after the top of the hour with Liz Storer, with Bronwyn Bishop, with Senator Malcolm Roberts. Well, it seems that the Labor Party wokeness, the inner city people who just love everything that involves lattes and nothing to do with coal-fire power, are losing the working vote. Gee, who'd have thought? I mean, watching Joel Fitzgibbon, I thought, belled the cat rather well this week. Malcolm Roberts, he said, you know, I'm watching people showing up with One Nation how to vote cards and with Liberal or National Party how to vote cards and not Labor how to vote cards, and even branch members of the Labor Party are doing that. The Labor Party have lost the worker vote, and I said this back in 2007 in the Parliament, where I said that they were looking after the non-productive elements of societies, not the workers. I reckon I was right then.
You are, and it's significant to remember one thing. Joel Fitzgibbon was not worried about blue-collar jobs until his job was threatened. Then he's terrified. And that's good. And he should be terrified because we have an outstanding candidate down there in Stuart Bonds, articulate, smart, savvy, and very, very dedicated to the country and very honest and straight. And he's raised a number of issues with us that we're prosecuting. Stuart is a wonderful man, and Joel needs to be concerned because his party has abandoned him. Even if what Joel is doing is sincere, then his party has still abandoned him because it's abandoned blue-collar workers. And the Labor Party is all about wokeness. That's all it is. Write them off.
Well, it's 25 years next year since Joel was elected. His dad, Eric, was there for a dozen years before that. This is a Fitzgibbon thing, Liz Storer, the seat of Hunter. But unless you actually start to get the workers of Australia front and foremost, you're not going to get their vote. And I actually think, look what the Republicans are doing in America, where they've broadened the base of their appeal. This certainly must be what the Liberal Party, the National Party, I know One Nation are doing it. I mean, we just need to know that the workers don't vote Labor anymore. I can understand why.
So can I. Look, I honestly don't understand how the ALP isn't just agreeing with everything Fitzgibbon has said. Gotta say, Joel broke my heart this week, stepping down from the front bench, and then more recently saying that it's not for a run at the leadership. I'm like, please, Fitz, do it for the country, buddy. Look, everything this guy says resonates now, and I take the Senator's point that maybe he wouldn't have said the same prior to the last election, but here he is trying to speak truth to power within his own party, and Labor has been getting crucified due to this new urbanisation that it's found. It literally, in Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia, it has no seats outside of the cities. When did this happen? It's happened since 2007 as their seats outside of city areas have dwindled. Aussies don't like wokeness. They're telling Labor, they screamed at Labor at the ballot box last year, Labor's not paying attention. I can't explain it for the life of me.
Well, Bronwyn Bishop today, and I know you're not on Twitter, but take my word for it, Anthony Albanese actually tweeted about how our climate is dying and the smoke is killing us and, you know, the Great Reset kind of narrative. And I was thinking, you know, Matthew Franklin, who I know well, is his media officer, you know, retweeted it. And I was thinking, oh, come on, Albo, come on, Franklin, you know. This is just like manna for heaven for the real Australians who think the Labor Party have completely lost the plot.
Well, the problem is, of course, and this happened some considerable time ago in the 90s, that the so-called rusted-on workers to the Labor Party ceased to be rusted on, and they ceased to be someone who was sort of under the boot of the employer, which is the picture that the Labor Party used to paint, but they became aspirational people. They became small business people. They became in charge of their own destiny. They could see that they could have a better future for their kids if they got these opportunities which Liberal governments offered. And so what the Labor Party missed out on was to see that the attitude had changed of people who were their traditional rusted-ons, that they had become the aspirational people who are the heart and soul of small business. And it is to the Liberal Party that they came. Now, a similar thing happened in the United States with Ronald Reagan, when the Reagan Democrats sort of became a phenomenon. It's happened here. So what we have to understand, and what the government, Liberal governments have to understand, is that you have to give those people the things that they need. And that's why the issue of cheap electricity is so vital. Because to be successful in those endeavours, they need cheap electricity. It is the only competitive advantage they have against imported goods. And they need to be able to produce here in Australia, as we pivot away from China, as we have to do, and become more self-reliant. That's why we need base power. And that's why we can't flood our power lines with the so-called, with wind and solar, because you get all sorts of problems with delivery of power. And I've said before, I can remember being in Manila in the 1980s, and there would be brownout periods, they'd call them, and every time all the lights went on in the palace at Malacanang, all the surrounding suburbs, they lost their power because they didn't have enough. Well, that'll happen to us. There'll always be enough. There'll always be enough for the green elites, for the Labor elites.
Well, that's our future.
The ordinary people will run out of it if we don't get some base power.
Look, the bottom line is we need people with trade skills, their nation-building skills. We need plumbers, we need sparkies, we need people who know how to build stuff with their hands or with really clever use of machines. They can be women, they can be men, they can be young, they can be old. We need those people. We need coal-fired power, we need water where and when we want it. It's not hard to work out, and I want to hear this from the Prime Minister. I want to give a shout-out before I finish, because we've got to wind up, but good on you, Dominic Perrottet, one of the greatest pieces of public policy. I'm never in favour of new taxes. The idea of taxing people with electric cars is a beauty. I'm all in favour of electric vehicles, but the infrastructure to make it possible for people like Jimmy Barnes in his $100,000 plus, electric car to refuel should be paid for in a tax by the people who own the cars, surely. It shouldn't be just you and me driving around in other cars. I would have thought that was a good piece of public policy. Dominic Perrottet, well done to you. Malcolm Roberts, thanks so much for your company tonight. Bronwyn Bishop, Liz Storer, brilliant to have you on tonight. And kudos to you, Bronwyn, for standing up for our Defence Force personnel, lest we forget indeed. Well, that's it for another week. Back again next week. Look forward to your company. Have a great weekend. Cheers.
Did you